2 years ago, I sat my professional review for my engineering chartership and was awarded a certificate to say that I passed shortly afterwards. I gave a presentation to a group of friends and colleagues, and so far have seen a handful of those members pass, and I wanted to share with you what I've shared with them. Other than my affiliation with the institution, I'm not sponsored by them. This video isn't endorsed by them. You should absolutely check the latest guidance and make sure it's suitable for you. Today we're going to talk around the 3 main points that make up your professional review. So that is the delivery of your presentation to your reviewers, your review, so that's of your presentation and your report, and then following communication tasks. We included this slide so that we can all calibrate ourselves to the same sort of position going into it. If you're operating at that nearly chartered sort of level, you want to be at the point where you can say, I know that I'm competent to make a decision here and it's the right one, or knowing that you don't know, and that will be a theme throughout this. To my understanding, they're looking to test, would this engineer make the correct decision down the line? Therefore, it's on you to be well read and have a wide understanding of the literature and the design codes in your industry, but also know how these applied, when you tweak them, when you pick one over the other, this sort of have and hope for a plan A. I'm going to avoid reading out the bullet points for you there, but essentially this is your process, your review, your chartership, it's no one else's. By this I mean have a backup, have a backup of a backup. This applies to your experience, but on the day, for example, I think we come onto this, have a backup Wi-Fi, have your hotspot ready on your phone. Is your meeting first thing? If they're going to be train strikes, could you get a hotel the night before? Murphy's Law states that if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. And it's up to you, obviously, to plan to get this. We've already touched on what your professional review consists of. What you might want to do is double check those timings as they might fluctuate. This is a note to say that the slides are pretty mundane, hopefully factual. So your presentation, or my one, was 15 minutes long. I had an intro slide that was just an image that basically allowed us to get into the room and meet one another. I then had a very quick career summary, and the purpose of this was to help to introduce to the reviewers who I was. So the night before, your reviewers will read all the reports of the 6 candidates that they have. The purpose of this summary is to make it easy for the reviewer to say, oh, this is Elliot, this is what they're about, I remember what to ask them. And essentially, you're making them feel at ease at the end of the day. I then went into the meat of my presentation, so everyone will present a different way. Mine, it was about one project and how I met a handful of attributes. Following my career summary, I then did sort of wider summary of projects that I included in my report, and it was quite nice in that there was an extracurricular activity that I referred to in my report, and I actually had an update and expand on the invitation. Number 4, at this point, they know who I am, what projects I've worked on, my general experience that should be in their minds. I then went into the deep dive on my project. So this first part takes perhaps 2 minutes, and then you've really got the meat to show off your expertise. As you'll know, the costs and contract types of your projects are very important and will change different parties' behaviors on the job depending on what they are. So it's helpful for the reviewers to understand, it's traditional generic design and build. What is this project? And it also, again, allows you to explain that you know where you are and sort of where you sit in the food chain, who has competing agendas, etc. And you talk around this. Point 6 is the one that's up for debate. So for me, I went through different competencies in different attributes. Then as I covered competency, what I do is I'll show this in a second, but I'd have a note that pops up that said the reviewer, promoted the industry to the younger generation, and sort of, draw their attention to, I wouldn't say that out loud, describe what I did, then have that note pop up to sort of solidify in their mind, actually explain it to them. There's a note there as well that says use presenter view. So I had 2 monitors, and I essentially had my script on one that had the camera on it as well, and then I had my screen share on the other, and I wasn't looking at that, and because I had everything animated, I just knew I needed to look at my script and the camera. Finally, a summary does what it says on the tin. You can bring everything that you've taught together. So for me, this was all my competencies, and then there was a nice closing slide that I'll come on to in a minute. I've put my camera on as I realised I'm being quite animated with my hands. Previously, I mentioned that there was a front slide. So this is what I greeted the reviewers with. We were able to exchange very quick pleasantries before we got into the meat of it. This was point 2, the introduction. So this is my career summary, and I'm going to take my hands off. So this was all automated. This flowed perfectly. In my script, I had big brackets that said click, and essentially that meant when I got to that end of that spiel, then press click, which I've done now, and it will pop the next bit for me to talk around. So I planned it to the sort of second, as it were. All I had to do was read, and when it said click, I wouldn't actually read that out loud. I'd press click and stuff them up. So this was just this was just 60 seconds on who I am, what I've done, and sort of projects I've worked on in the country. This was point 3, I believe. So these are all pictures that were in my professional report, just to again remind them, oh, this is his CV, these are his 4 pictures, these are his projects. And then again, I believe my hands off, I had some other some other projects that I've worked on that were in that previous image we saw around the UK. This was the extracurricular stuff that came back. We won a second place in a Lego building competition. That was the one snazzy animation I had throughout my whole professional review. I know I've got silly ones in this presentation. That was hopefully to take some of the sting of what I'm saying. So I gave them an introduction, what we'd be looking at today. I don't really like how that looks now on the background, but there we are. And there we go. This was the project. So this was one of the 3 projects that I wrote about in my report. And what you write about in your report will depend on career and your experience. For me, I together 3, and it was nice in that I had stuff that I hadn't mentioned in my report that held back. So for this professional reputation, I could really expand on that and have some nice things to talk about. This is the bit I said about the contracts. So understanding that, where I sat, and that takes us up to point 5. That's closed. So now we'll go on to 6 and 7. There we go. So that note at the bottom there where it says click, that was the bit I told you about earlier where I click the next slide. So my hands are off, not there, but essentially I talk around, okay, I coordinated some underground drainage. Press click, there you go, design coordination. I did this throughout all the things that I spoke about. So these are just some slides straight out of my professional review. Then at the end, I think my hands are off for this bit. So I'd spent 12 minutes or what have you talking around all these things that I'd done during this project, and then this was sort of the summary, just saying, so yeah, that's the project and the good hard work I did on it. Take note of that image on site in the bottom right, because we will come back to that later. Once you've finished your presentation, it's nice to have a closing slide to sit on. They will obviously want to move away from this, and they'll either ask you to go back into your presentation. Useful, and I might touch on this later. So you see I've got number 16 on that slide. You say to your reviewers at the start, just so you know, all my slides are numbered. If you'd like to ask questions, you can note of the slide number, and then we quickly go back to that one. What I also did was I included elevations and 3Ds of my project. The purpose of this was that what you can do is get a pen out, and then you draw, for example, what your bending moment diagram looked like, or that was a bit strange there, or when they want to ask you about the project, or how does this cantilever work. I don't know why it's glitching like that. The important part to know is how to get out of the pen system, which I have gotten. So pressing forward, have some elevations and GAs at the back of your report to talk around, and that closes out points 8 and 9. Presentation. I've got 7 big tips for your presentation. The first one is in the wrong order. I check out the professional review guidance and have some sort of a attempt at, making your presentation. There are also workshops that once you've got a bit of an idea, I'd recommend going to a workshop that the institution organise. Here you've probably got 50 to 80 people, and we'll touch on that eventually. Hopefully you've got mentors in your organisation and perhaps even outside of your organisation. Before you deliver your presentation to your 2 reviewers, highly recommend booking in at least 1 mock review. I know people that have done up to, let's say 5 to 10. I personally did 3. I've heard of people doing double that. I've heard of people doing 1. I don't know anyone that's done 0 and passed. Let's put it that way. This will give you time to figure out what style of presentation works for you, what you actually like, and obviously your reviewers need some follow-up time in their calendar to give useful, constructive feedback off. We touched on that earlier. It's pointless doing a mock review and teeing up people to help you out if you're not even ready yourself. So prep beforehand, and like I did, you want to treat your presentation like an extension of your report. So you want the script that you're saying to be top quality, or your images, annotations, all of that to also be quality that you're proud of. I've already mentioned about using presenter view and having that on the screen camera. So when I showed you that picture on site earlier, I'm going to flip flick back to it now. What I mean by this is what you see on screen here is absolutely fair game for the reviewers to completely pull apart. So that image on site, you've got someone that's standing straight on the reinforcement out a walkboard. Your reviewers would be very entitled, or it would be a fair comment to say, did you not stop to tell the site manager that you've got operatives walking without walkboards? Suddenly you're on the back foot. No, I didn't tell the site manager. What is that? Because you don't care about health and safety? Why did you not do that? Suddenly you're defending yourself rather than sort of celebrating your success. So whatever you include image-wise in your presentation, you want to be able to back this up as if it was in your report. So when you do your own little mocks, it might be worth cooking up or asking people for, what are the meanest questions to ask. So, we've got a finite element model there. Again, that'd be subject to brutal scrutiny about relying on that hand checks, what type of plate or shell structure you assumed for the slabs in the wall, what level of fixity did you assign to the steel elements, what degree of release, was it a plastic or elastic analysis, why did you pick those? Oh, you don't know if it was plastic or elastic, and what you built this, right? So yeah, you can see everything in your report can get cornered. So I've described the style of presentation that I went for. However, I've heard, or given this example, someone just put up one photo of site, lots of different things going on. So from memory, I think they had plant moving under a overhead power line, they had some deep excavation, they had a road, and there are enough things on this image for them just to talk around for 10 minutes. You don't have to do anything complicated as I did. This sort of ties in with number 2, so work out what your style is. The one I try and go for is tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them, which you might notice I'm sort of doing right. And we've touched on number 7, include slide numbers, tell them about it, your job trying to make their lives easier, and we'll come on to that bit actually. That's the introduction and the presentation. Now we'll go on to your actual interview, which is confusingly labeled number 2. So if you're approaching your chartership, you probably have a good example for each sub attribute and how you've demonstrated competency for that. Awesome, everyone's got that. My challenge to you is and an interviewer would be well within their right to say this. Oh, you've demonstrated that you've got a good understanding of health and safety regulations. Give me an example of how this came into practice, how you use this. Awesome, thank you very much. Give me another example. Awesome, give me another one. And suddenly you're, if you don't have that second one, at least in your chamber, you are very much on the back foot and you're defending your position rather than broadcasting excellence. So yeah, my tip is go through every sub attribute, give it a second example. There is so much stuff that you obviously need to know as a chartered engineer, and in your interview, all of this could definitely come up. I'm not going to read it out loud, but you should definitely add it to your timeline. We'll come on to your Gantt chart in a minute, but you should absolutely be able to go into detail on all of this if asked. One thing to not forget is that your own report is also very important. So this is all the interviewers have had to look at so far. So it might well be that they don't go into United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but actually just grill you on your own report. So have a good refresher and remind yourself about the stuff that you're bragging about, because they're going to grill you on it. So this point isn't actually true, and I've not been told it by anyone at the ICA, but I've convinced myself that in each review, they're going to push you and push you and push you on a topic, and you need to be able to confidently, and this is the same in your professional life afterwards, you need to be able to say, I don't know this, I'm not competent to be able to answer this. However, I do have contact XYZ, and go to them and get you an answer. So it's not guaranteed to happen. If you feel yourself getting a bit hot at the collar and perhaps out of your depth, literally, it might be time to say, hey, look, I'm sorry. If you're asking me about this competency, perhaps we can talk about this, but in regards to the question you've just asked there, I'd be trying to keep you happy and exacerbating my truths a bit for an answer. So, could you perhaps rephrase that? Or perhaps I'm going to have to go back to the legal department or something like this and get back to you, or your finance department or a steel expert or what have you. You just want to keep in the back of your mind that at some point you're going to have to say, I don't know, and that's okay. You're not going to know everything. Very okay. They need to understand that you wouldn't essentially lie to a client to keep them happy. So I need to be somewhat careful about what I say here. The review will definitely depend on thought and you as a person. So I've heard whether it's meant to be right or not. I'm sorry, ICE, please don't be upset about this. But some people get really grilled on a few. Some people get a little bit on all of them. Some people get tons of stuff on the current activities of the ICE. Some get none or very little. But there's a real spectrum of what you get. Obviously, if preparing for this and you're keen, as you probably are at this point in the video, just need to have a think of that what if scenario. What if we just sat for the full hour, talked about health and safety? Could I do that? Would I struggle? Okay, I wouldn't struggle with that, but if it was this attribute, and essentially you're trying to find that that point of failure and cover your own back. So it's that plan A, plan B, and C. This one is a personal illegal hack, and not sure if they'll endorse it. So you'll get your interviewers' names, and it might be will be interviewed by D. Adamson and someone. You can use the ICE member database to put in their surname. I'm not saying they'll be a fellow, but they're likely going to have a profile with a bit more about it. You might have to do a bit of inferring, but you can get a full name, and then you can go onto LinkedIn and look up who you're going to be interviewed by. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend messaging them on LinkedIn and say, hey, looking forward to meet you or anything like that. But what this does enable you to do is sort of break the ice internally, or for me it did. And I could also see that one of my interviewers was an expert in SUDs and contracts. So I sort of had in the back of my mind a tiny bit to not lecture the very, very competent person in SUDs and contracts about those things, and to sort of maybe raise my guard a tiny bit if they started to pry, because what might be common knowledge and easy for them actually be past the limit. And it's just being mindful that you don't want to give answers to keep people happy. You need to stay factual and grounded. Okay, so this is the third and final point. So for the communication task, the big takeaway is it is a timed writing exercise, and you cannot write fast enough. So you're allowed to create a cheat sheet, and there are limits on how small you can make the font. Obviously, if you have no margins and 0.4 fonts or what have you, then you're going to fit loads on there. There's guidance that says what you can and can't do. I talked about the ICE events earlier. So they do mock sessions where they'll give you, there you go, attribute 4, health, safety, and welfare. So they're free to go to, and you'll be on a call with 50 plus people. These are all people looking to get chartered. You'll be put into breakout rooms and given a question, and then you'll come up with essentially just planning phase of your mock, and then you will get invited to a room at the end of the hour, what have you, and each group shares the fantastic ideas they've had and how they go about approaching that question. I mentioned that timing is everything. So basically want a timed mock under your belt where you go into it so you understand how much you need to write. You can find a question at one of these webinars that I've just suggested, or you can ask around. Essentially get yourself a question and see if you pass or fail. And if you'd fail, then you need to brush up. I can't remember the time that you get given for the mock, if it's something like an hour and a half. I believe it was 90 minutes that I had for my communications task. The advice I got given was in the first 15 minutes, you're going to be given 2 questions and write a plan for them both as if you were about to tackle both. At the end of those 15 minutes, have a look at your plans. And it might be the case that actually the one that you thought you'd ace, when you come to it and you look at your cheat sheet, you realize you've got loads of stats that back up other question that actually you run question B rather than question A. It's my understanding actually that the interviewers as well pick which question they give you. So something to bear in mind, but obviously nothing you can do for it, but you can prepare for all questions on attributes. Nearly at the wrap up point now. There's 3 slides left now. Don't know where I've heard this, but essentially the report writing, the presentation communications task basically allows the institution to check that no one else is writing for you. You can write. It's actually your experience. You're not borrowing someone's career, blah, blah, blah. Very easy with these things to get sort of worked up in your head. But at the end of the day, remember, these are just 2 people that have been asked to interview. They're humans with careers very similar to yours. Pass rate is 70%. So sort of in 50%. And it's a lot of paperwork failure. It's, and it comes on to this next point. You've had minimum 2 members and your development officer say that you've got the right B there, that your report is good enough, got the experience. We come on to it a bit later, perhaps. I'm running out of time to say that we'll come on to it later, but you're there on your terms. And so there it is. It is a celebration of your career. You've worked so hard to get here. And essentially it's just an opportunity to share with 2 other chartered members. Hey, look, I've worked really hard and I think I've got competency. I know I don't know everything, but have a look at this. This team behind me says that I'm good enough and I think I'm there, be an asset. You're cheery. You're not groveling and begging. It's a celebration. I mentioned the Gantt chart a while back. What I didn't actually mention was just forget your social life. That is out the door. It's not nice, but I think it's a necessary evil. Now you can see some of the activities that I went through, but essentially you're borderline, people take annual leave for this, and generally my workplace was super supportive. But if this isn't a part-time job in the background already, it's now a full-time job in that final week to make sure that you're ready and that you're going to smash it. Final note on this slide, and perhaps it's best to go on to the final slide to talk about this actually, follows on from the last one, but all of this process, what gets out is completely linear what you've done. If you absolutely smash a report, do 10 mocks by yourself, and really go through the motion of every question, angle, you'll be interrogated on. You've read all your regulations, you know what the current sort of topics in the news about your industry is. As long as you've covered all your bases, you will do well. It's straight up. And if you don't put in the time, then you're going to have a difficult time and maybe struggle. Which is an awesome segue onto the first point there. Put in the hours, do yourself justice, and celebrate with, going. You can hold your head high. You've done everything possible. We've talked about Gantt chart, have a plan, and then have a plan B and C. There's lots to look at. Can't stress how much time to put into it, really. So you can book in mock reviews, and you really dial in your sort of presentation and your interview. So these are all things that, well, the presentation, I guess, is all on you. The interview on your presentation, you can't control what questions you get. If you think about your presentation and the interview you get, so the presentation feeding to the interviewers, and then the interviewers are going to ask you questions about your report and your presentation. So that's sort of on them. You can't control those questions. Communication task, you don't have that verbal back and forth to work it out, so that's on you. Make sure that you ace that first time. You might have noticed that this slide is set out sort of introduction and points 1 of 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3, and done. So presentation, remind them who you are, sort of your CV and your projects. You're there to make their lives easy. So put in the time for your presentation, and if you can hold back a tiny bit of information out of your report and then sort of wow them with it in your presentation, that works out really advantageously. With the interview, obviously reread your own report, and then we've been over the list of all document, be well versed. Go through your attribute list and write down which project and where you got the experience to meet that attribute. Then do it again for that. Then do it again for your confidence of when you get asked for another example, you've got one loaded in the chamber. And lastly, you can't rely on other people to do the mocks for you so you can put in a bunch of random questions into Excel and create a formula that will spit out a random one when you press enter. Mock yourself, time yourself, and get comfortable with the angle. Finally, your communication task, cheat sheet. You don't want sort of waffle kind of, sort of in the back of your brain, stuff you already know. What you want is facts and data, like I say there, that is a niche reference that you're not going to be able to pull from the back line. So what I mean by this is that the World Health Organization published a report in 2015, said there is a $80 billion spending deficit on healthcare or something like this. You're not going to remember all that bit, but if you put that on your cheat sheet, awesome. And that's what your cheat sheet should be used for. I was a bit naughty and I didn't actually do a timed mock, and by kicking myself for it at the time. Make sure you do a timed mock so that the first time you're writing under pressure isn't in the real thing. That was really daft on my part. And then finally, you're going to do well. You're going to put in the prep and you're going to get a nice certificate. At this point, I've been told there's a few spotlights shining on you. So this is a bit of rocket fuel at time that you get your chartership that's thrown over your career. And once you've got this news, this is a good time to pivot or say, oh, there's some chartered I'd like to do. Just have a think about what chartership would unlock for you. As you can hopefully tell from the wonderful finishing slide, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Hopefully there were some useful points in there. And if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out and I'll do my best to get back to you. Thank you very much. Cheers.